From what I can tell, Gojo has been making his waves around the anime and power scaling community because of how strong he is, and he has a pretty interesting skill set. The sorcerer with the 6 eyes who has a barrier of infinite space between him and his opponents at all times so you can't touch him. But why is Gojo so strong? That's a question I can answer in a future video, but you may get your answer here depending on how you like to scale your characters. I've been wanting to get into JJK content for a while now, and this is going to be my first step into this sort of territory. I was originally going to do a video on Gojo versus Heavy Sasuke, but I did some research on it, and I realized that no matter which version of Sasuke I put up against Gojo, it was never really a fair fight. It was either Gojo would stomp Sasuke or Sasuke would stomp Gojo. I did have help making this script from a friend, so if you've been here before and it doesn't exactly sound like me, that would primarily be the reason why, as well as the fact that this is my first JJK video. This video isn't going to really be any power scaling. I'm mainly going to be covering Gojo from a narrative aspect, but there are some things about his power built into his narrative, so if you're into those kind of arguments, you'll more than likely enjoy this video. Also, if you're into this kind of stuff, make sure to subscribe and like the video, but enough of my rambling, let's get into Gojo's narrative. I also want to say this video will contain manga spoilers, so if you've only watched the anime, be prepared for that. From a narrative standpoint, the main aspects of Gojo's character that are primarily touched upon and favored by the JJK community would have to be his brazen confidence, his heavily emphasized and indomitable strength, the saddening relationship between himself and Geto, and the sensei dynamic prevalent throughout the series. While these aspects are all important and each does go a long way in establishing the concept of Gojo explicitly, I would say that the forefront of his character is actually that he doesn't meet the eye. To say Gojo's character is predominantly implicit would be more than an understatement. A lot of what Gege is able to do throughout the series comes from the incredible ability they've crafted over the years to show without telling. And Gojo is nothing short of a godsend when it comes to Gege excelling at doing this. For this reason, it's actually pretty easy to gaze past Gojo's character and see him as nothing special, but in actuality, he's a very layered demonstration of Gege's ability to weave together narratives seamlessly. Gojo's base characterization does a lot to articulate to us that his character is casually discernible. He is taller than everyone else, which conveys outward superiority without much thought. He is slim and handsome, which shows a purity, something that in a series like JJK or any of its predecessors where grunge and gore are damn near around every corner, it's indicative of capability. Some would say it's elegance, and it can be, but I would say that the ability to remain effectively flawless and well kept even in pressure scenarios is usually a trait associated with characters able to casually defend themselves. His blindfold is a symbol of dehumanization in a sense for the reader, as it strips away a natural point of human connection by making it where we can never establish eye contact. And in tandem with the blindfold, his white hair gives him an aura of abnormality. It's pretty simple to see he doesn't fit into the world around him necessarily and is someone not to be messed with. This is where Gege goes a step further and gets very implicit with characterization. For starters, Gojo's full name, Satoru Gojo, happens to draw a lot from Buddhist roots, the word Satori meaning enlightenment. Secondly, Gojo's hand sign he frequently does, very reminiscent of Buddhist movements. And thirdly, his most famous quote, "On heaven and earth, I alone am the honored one," exists as a very clear reference directly to the Buddha in his words. Overall, it's a clear depiction of Gojo as a wise and powerful entity, but these statements and mannerisms must also coexist with the cocky, prideful, belligerent, and sometimes downright idiotic aspects of what Gojo shows. So does this make Gojo unwise, or perhaps his character inconsistent? Neither is the case. What Gege has done here is create a nuanced character through various explicit and implicit moments, as well as a subtle character details down to the very design and naming process, with everything going full circle to result in the layered character we see throughout the series. And even this is just a brief look into his characterization, as I personally think the more you look into it, the more can be found. Moving into what Gojo encompasses thematically, off his characterization alone, we see a lot of insight onto the meaning of power and its purpose, especially during his verbal struggle with Geto. A gripping tale of the man versus the herd, a philosophical concept, but to put it in brief terms as to not drag this out too long, the idea of a Superman who can influence his society regardless of morals versus the day-to-day people confined to obliged society, and a struggle with identity as Gojo throughout Hidden Inventory struggles to identify himself distinctly from his power, and then later in Shibuya ends up sealed because he can't submit solely to his identity as the strongest and clings to his humanity as Satoru Gojo. From this, Gege pulls forward a lot of varying concepts that shape Gojo in the Jujutsu world. his most notable being his relationship with Geto, which shows a very wide spectrum of rather humanist concepts. While the Jujutsu Society is depicted as a utilitarian in nature and very sacrificial, Geto and Gojo, two people who should be special enough to go without being dragged down by society, actually exude some of the clearest scars from its maiming. Geto, starting as someone who feels Jujutsu sorcerers should protect humans, has his heart broken time and time again until he is inevitably lost in an existential crisis in the face of the overwhelming machine that is the battle on curses. Alternatively, Gojo, someone so isolated from human normalcy that he was initially annoyed by the weakness of humans, finds himself changing his individualist ideals somewhat only after having his morals and emotions swayed so heavily by his friendship with and eventually loss of Geto. The relationship highlights a lot about Gojo's depth and overall dehumanizing nature of the world they exist in. And while this brief mention doesn't even truly do their dynamic justice, it does however show that in just a brief 10 chapters and a few expansions here and there, Gege was able to craft a dynamic that is insanely nuanced. Another dynamic is that of Gojo and Toji. Now, this will be a bit more lengthy as I really want to drive home the meaning I found in this, but this is still technically about Gojo only, so I won't go into detail on this, and I think we should remember a lot more can still be drawn from this. So, as we know from what was mentioned in Shibuya Incident Arc during chapter 91, there's an idea that techniques dictate sorcerers' worlds. This essentially means that sorcerers with different techniques are living worlds apart, and this manages to define Toji and Gojo as a dynamic. If techniques define our world, then Gojo's world is limitless. He is an entity of limitless potential, a concept usually applied to all humans, but actually drastically exemplified in Gojo, referencing the man versus the herd once again. I usually find a lot of his character to reference Nisha's work and the conception of Superman. I think this further strengthens that framework. Gojo is in possession of an ultimate world-changing power, one that gives him physically the power to influence his society through violence at any point. And because he possesses this power, his natural egoism and worldview is also reflective of the individualist power he possesses. But coupled with this, Gojo also possesses the six eyes. While the aforementioned limitless is an ultimate power that implies utter freedom as a sole entity, the six eyes are ironically confided to the highest degree. Gojo cannot see people as people. He cannot interact with the world where he should reign as a sole power appropriately. His limitless power of man is fundamentally confined by his all-seeing ability, which relates to a frozen position in fate. Naturally, the possession of both leaves Gojo's individuality being so heavily emphasized, but I doubt it would have grown to be as radical or that he would be the true loner we see had his worldview not literally been loneliness from what was likely the very moment he opened his eyes at birth. Jujutsu Society coaxes him into being their ideal entity. We see how they raise prodigies like Nobito and Oya, but it's a very utilitarian-based society that helps the majority, sorcerers, whereas with his world altered by the six eyes, Gojo becomes the man, not the head of the herd. He rises too far above because there's no way to deal with his existence. Toji, alternatively, is much simpler. He has no place in the world. He has no technique, and thus his world does not exist. He lives merely in the world below that of man, a literal hell of abuse and tortured by his title for life. For reference, you could say he's sinless from the perspective of lacking cursed energy equal lacking human flaws and sins. And so in this, we have Toji as someone who has no spot in the world of a man equals a world of sin historically, and Gojo is someone who is too abnormal to fit into the world on two opposing sides of the coin for unique reasons, engaged in a clash that effectively flips the irony of their role in the liberated versus the shackled dynamic. It's a perfect display of paralleling two characters, creating surpluses of meaningful irony in a dynamic and tightly weaving two narratives together so well, not just in interaction, but also in characterization and thematic importance. But that's it. That's the video. Gojo, on top of all the things I just mentioned there, he's actually a pretty strong guy, so if anyone wants to see a video on Gojo just being power scaled exclusively, I can be sure to get that out for you. Just let me know in the comments. Let me also know if there's any characters from any other series that you want me to take a look at, like I did here with Gojo, whether it be Naruto, Dragon Ball, Hunter x Hunter, anything, just mention it down below. And if I've read it before, I'll try to get a video out on it. If you like the video, obviously be sure to leave a like on it, subscribe, And other than that, have a nice day.